Number 10. Deadpool. If you thought Deadpool was a brutal vigilante and sometimes straight up anti-hero, wait till you see him go up against Moon Knight. In Vengeance of the Moon Knight, issue number 8, these two face off. And while you might think Deadpool's healing factor would give him a leg up here, it is actually Moon Knight who comes out the victor in their fight. What's interesting is seeing the difference and similarities of these characters juxtaposed throughout their fight. Both are brutal in terms of their methods, both have their own voices in their head to deal with, and both of them are often heroes who are misunderstood. Sometimes they seem like the bad guys while trying to do the heroic thing. Their initial fight here doesn't last long though, as Moon Knight uses his sword to make Deadpool admit defeat, with him surrendering, croaking out, "Uncle." And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not consider subscribing? Click that subscribe button. It feeds the algorithm. It's good for your soul. You should do it. Number 9. Black Panther. During Age of Khonshu in the 2018 run of Avengers, in issue number 33, Moon Knight faced off against pretty much all of the Avengers. One that he faced directly was Black Panther. Now, when he confronted T'Challa in Wakanda with his army of basically Khonshu worshippers, his presence was so intimidating, in addition to his previous encounters with Iron Fist, and Doctor Strange, that the two didn't even have to fight. Instead, Black Panther simply chose to surrender. Of course, this was strategic, but the fact remains that Moon Knight got what he wanted, a willful surrender from Black Panther without even having to come to blows. Instead, he just intimidated T'Challa into surrendering to him, even if it was, like I said, also possibly a strategic play on Black Panther's side. T'Challa would still end up imprisoned, tormented, and bound, forced to bow down to the power of Khonshu in the next issue. Number 8. Ultimate Spider-Man. When it comes to the Ultimate Universe, Moon Knight is an even more terrifying vigilante. At one point, he faces off against the Ultimate Universe version of Peter Parker's Spider-Man and manages to scare him off with how crazy and how powerful he is, and how scary he is, to be honest. Pretty impressive when you consider that normally Spider-Man would be considered more physically strong and overall more powerful than Mark and his Moon Knight persona. Why were these two even fighting? Well, Moon Knight has mistaken Spider-Man here for a criminal, but even Spider-Man was just intimidated by the hero, and instead of sticking around, opted to just escape the fight instead. It's not a straight-up defeat, but making Spider-Man retreat is not easy to do in most cases, and I personally would still consider if somebody retreats that they kind of lost that fight because they left. Number 7. Ghost Rider. How do you humble the Ghost Rider? How about stealing his wheels? For Robbie Reyes, that's one of the worst things you can do, steal his car, and that's exactly what Moon Knight set out to do and accomplished. While Robbie was asleep, Moon Knight basically managed to jack his car, which also drained Robbie of much of his power as Ghost Rider, as that power was actually tied to his car. Moon Knight simply took the car and drove off into the night with it in issue number 33, part 1 of the Age of Khonshu story from the 2018 run of Avengers. This was also the first part of that story, and to really humble Robbie Reyes, he was only one of a few heroes who had their source of power taken by Moon Knight, all in this one single issue.
Number 6. Cadaverous. Ivan Renz was an employee of Stark Industries alongside his mentor and Peter Parker's parents. They developed the Key, a tech that could potentially bring people back to life, but the experiments failed, sending his mentor to the afterlife. Now, Tony Stark dismantled the unit, and Ivan eventually became the supervillain known as Cadaverous, only ever appearing in the J.J. and Henry Abrams written Bloodline Spider-Man storyline from 2019. Mary Jane Watson loses her life to Cadaverous on the 5th page of the first issue after Spider-Man is swarmed and beaten pretty badly by him and his minions. Then Spider-Man just completely quits. 12 years later, the story has a one-armed version of Peter Parker, who is now the honestly pretty horrible single father of Ben Parker, Peter and Mary Jane's son. After Cadaverous returns out of hiding and kidnaps Peter to use his blood for his evil plans, it's up to the new Spider-Man, Ben Parker, with the help of his friend Faye Ito and old Tony Stark and Riri Williams, to fight Cadaverous and his minions, which includes a cyber-zombified team of Avengers. Number 5. Doc Ock. Okay, so being one of Spider-Man's major arch enemies, Doc Ock has had quite a few different instances of bringing Peter down a peg or two. Today, we're going to talk about the curious case of Otto's adamantium tentacles. So, way back in the day, Dr. Octopus happened to get his hands on some adamantium octopus arms. They were put out of commission and weirdly forgot about for a very long time until they made a spectacular proper return in Spider-Man 1990 issue 18 and issue 19. This is the Revenge of the Sinister Six arc, and not only does Otto manage to make quick work of the entire Sinister Six to take control, even turning the Sandman into glass, when Spider-Man crashes the party, Otto manages to get a hold of him and slam him all over the place, tearing massive holes in Spider-Man's costume and throwing him hundreds of meters away out of the building they were fighting in. He even manages to completely thrash Professor Hulk with these arms too. It's actually kinda nuts. Number 4, the Sandman. Okay, now look, this does absolutely take place in an alternate Earth, but it takes place on Earth Z, with versions of Spider-Man and Sandman who are canonically exactly the same, with all the same abilities as their usual selves. And that makes it terrifying. Allow me to explain. In Marvel Zombies Returns, the zombie heroes Spider-Man and Luke Cage end up on Earth 91126. Zombie Spider-Man thinks he can cure their zombie virus by finding the Lifeline tablet, but just as he is getting underway with the plan, he gets mistaken for this Earth's normal Spider-Man who went to go change his costume. It's really weird. He's then forced into a fight with Dr. Octopus, Electro, Mysterio, Vulture, Kraven, and Sandman, aka the Sinister Six. Despite trying his best to hold back his hunger, Zombie Spider-Man completely lets go and brutalizes the entire squad of villains, with Sandman literally being the only survivor fleeing for his life. So, when the actual normal Spider-Man shows back up and confronts Sandman, having no idea what just happened, the terrified Sandman does not even try to let this Spider-Man anywhere close to him. He slams him ruthlessly with these massive sand mallets before turning into sand and forcing himself into Peter's mouth, landing inside of his stomach, and then bursting Spider-Man from the inside out. Say what you will about the extreme nature of this comic, but this is entirely possible for the Sandman to do anytime he wants, and that is terrifying. Number 3, Electro. The Marvel Knights Spider-Man comic series was written with a more mature slant than previous Spider-Man titles. After a brutal fight with the Green Goblin in which Peter came out on top, Peter gets home only to find his beloved Aunt May has been kidnapped. His ensuing hunt leads him to the Owl, who tells him that Electro and the Vulture were the culprits. In a rage, Spider-Man finds the two and a massive fight breaks out as they're attempting to steal a big old chunk of change. Once their briefcase of money gets launched open, sending the money flying all over the place, Old Max loses his patience and blasts Spider-Man with a massive electroshock that also causes a huge explosion. Now, with Electro revealing his new costume, he manages to get on powerful blasts one after another on Spider-Man, controlling metal objects and firing them all at Spider-Man and innocent bystanders, blowing up cars full of civilians before revealing how his time in prison has allowed him to come up with new ways to use his powers, including ionizing metal, as he literally slams a semi-truck onto Spider-Man. At the end of the fight, Spider-Man learns that the Owl tricked him and was only using him for his own needs. In that moment of realization, Electro is able to blast him off of a skyscraper, sending him straight to the emergency room. Number 2, Paul. Paul is straight up just a dick. For those of you who do not know, Paul is a very recent addition to the Spider-Man comics, and he is none other than Mary Jane's new squeeze. He also really randomly happens to have kids with MJ? I don't know, but what I do know is that he is a menace. Paul is the son of Emissary, but from a different reality entirely. That doesn't really matter, he did totally take out the villain himself, so he's not really a villain, but he stole Peter Parker's girl and spent 4 years with her due to time dilation, even adopting 2 kids. He's punched out Peter Parker and was defended by MJ herself. He then had the audacity to pay off some of Peter's medical fees out of sympathy, and then invited him to dinner sometime. Paul and MJ stayed together, and Peter has wanted her back the whole time since, and quite honestly, screw Paul, I hate him. Number 1, Spike. Now, most of you may think you don't know who Spike is, but I promise you, everyone knows who Spike is. Spike just happened to be a low-level criminal burglar operating in New York around the same time that Peter Parker started his journey as Spider-Man. This burglar had been the cellmate of the infamous Depression-era gangster Dutch Malone. In the 1930s, Malone lived in New York City's Forest Hills neighborhood. It was long rumored that Malone had hidden millions of dollars away somewhere in that house, and the burglar heard Malone talking in his sleep about where he hid the money. Spike the burglar next showed up in the hallway of a Manhattan television studio just as the young, naive Spider-Man stepped out of his dressing room. Having robbed the studio's office and being chased by security guard Baxter Bigelow, Spider-Man refused to help, allowing the burglar to make it into the elevator and escape. Turns out this would cost him, as this is the very same burglar who would break into that house in Forest Hills, owned by the Parker family, and accidentally take the life of Uncle Ben, teaching Peter an important lesson about power and responsibility. Kicking off the list at number 10 is Civil War. While there was a clear winner in terms of who won the conflict in Marvel Comics' Civil War event, that being Tony Stark, in the grand scheme of things, there really wasn't any winner. The Civil War split the entire superhuman community down the middle. Heroes allied with villains, friends turned on friends, people were manipulated into joining a side, and a few of those people passed away, all for an act that would require the registration and regulation of superhuman individuals, following a completely avoidable superhuman-caused catastrophe. And while you had Tony Stark coming out on top, he made a lot of enemies along the way, including Spider-Man, and I don't think he ever intended for the death of Steve Rogers. Also, after he came out on top, he was put in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D. and did a spectacularly bad job, leading to Norman Osborn, of all people, to take over, ushering in a whole lot more of bad. I don't think really anyone came away from Civil War feeling particularly great. Number 9. The Reigning. After the passing of Odin at the hands of Surtur during Dan Jurgens' Thor run from 1998 to 2004, Thor became the new All-Father of Asgard, and he made some pretty interesting choices during this time. One of the biggest decisions he made was moving Asgard to the skies above New York to inspire mortals with its grandeur and to force the world to be better. This triggers a conflict with the governments of Earth, which ultimately ends with the Asgardians conquering the planet and completely wiping out most of the superheroes. The story now shifts 200 years, where Thor now rules over this dystopian future and is no longer worthy of Mjolnir after killing his human counterpart Jake Olsen, symbolically cutting his ties with humanity. There is no more famine or disease, no borders or religion, there's no need to work, and Asgard's magic provides infinite clean energy for the whole planet. But this comes at the cost of making humans become inferior, with a few also planning to rise up against the Asgardians in order to regain their freedom. Thor marries Amora the Enchantress, and they have a son called Magni. Now Magni ends up supporting the humans and the rebellion after seeing how badly the Asgardians are actually treating them. He challenges his father to lift up Mjolnir, proving that he is no longer worthy and leading Thor to question his own actions. After seeing the error of his ways, Thor uses the Odin Force to go back in time, erasing that whole timeline and making sure the Asgardians never take over Earth. For a character as unstoppable as Thor, his defeat here came in a much more poetic way, and it made for a great story. If you're enjoying this part 2, make sure you get yourself over to our channel to check out part 1, and maybe, if you want to, subscribe while you're at it. Always helps us out here at Top 10 Nerd. Coming in at number 8 is Avengers Infinity War. In the MCU, most of the movies follow a simple idea of a hero facing and eventually defeating a villain, coming out triumphant by the end of the film, completing an arc. Even if the villain survives to continue into another film in the cinematic universe, they are still usually defeated by the hero at the end of their debut movie. Well, when we were given the Avengers Infinity War, it marked the first time in the MCU when the heroes, and furthermore, all the heroes together, officially lost by the end of the movie. Despite their best efforts to stop Thanos from acquiring all the Infinity Stones to complete his mission, he still managed to put them all into his big golden gauntlet and snap out half of the life in the universe. He left the heroes in shock of what even just happened as they watched their friends turn to dust. And when we meet them all again in the next film, Avengers Endgame, they've all been left reeling and trying to move forward from such a massive defeat, which led to one of their greatest victories. Number 7. Shazam in Injustice. In the Injustice games, Superman is the tyrant ruler of the Earth. Most of the other heroes have either joined him or joined Batman as part of an effort to thwart Superman and bring him down. One of the heroes who remained on Superman's side was actually Billy Batson, Shazam. This is surprising to pretty much everyone, but seeing that Billy Batson is only a kid, more susceptible to some manipulation, it starts to make more sense. It also makes it very brutal when Superman takes down Shazam for turning on Superman and mentioning the now dead Lois Lane. Superman takes down Billy frighteningly quick, using his frost breath to freeze Shazam's mouth shut, stopping him from using his signature phrase, and then melting his brain through his eyes with his heat vision. Now, I don't know if this would actually work in any other continuity. I don't see why not, but Shazam has proven himself more than capable to take on Superman. Either way, it made me immediately hate this version of Superman, and it made me pretty darn sad at the same time. Number 6. Magik and Colossus. Now, yes, neither of these guys are villains. Not normally, but they definitely became villains, and that's what we are going to talk about. In the Avengers vs. X-Men event, a group of 5 X-Men were granted quite the power boost in the form of the Phoenix Force, which came to Earth for Hope Summers. Now, thanks to Tony Stark, it was split into 5 parts, and that's when it inhabited the bodies of those 5 X-Men. The mutant siblings Colossus and Magik were 2 of these X-Men. Now, Spider-Man is physically no match for either one of these guys, not with the Phoenix Force at least. When he ended up facing them both in the 9th issue of the event, Spider-Man got completely beaten to a pulp. It was brutal, but of course, he still has that charming personality and beautiful brain. It turns out that when one of the avatars for the Phoenix Force is defeated, the power of the remaining avatars gets boosted up even more, and it ended up that there were only a few of them left. Even though he was completely wrecked, Spider-Man gives them a little innocent reminder of the fact that if one of them is defeated, the other one will gain even more power. Now, we don't get to see the fight that takes place between the 2 of them. Instead, we get to see the unconscious bodies of both of them, with Spider-Man still barely standing to let everyone know he got them to knock each other out. But they still completely wrecked the web slinger. Number 5. The Thunderbolts. Thanks to the MCU, Robert Downey Jr. and Tom Holland, most people believe that Spider-Man and Tony Stark are as thick as thieves. And they are. In the MCU. There was a time where comic book Tony Stark and Peter Parker got along. In the beginning of the comic book Civil War event, Peter was all for Tony's Superhuman Registration Act, and this was partially because of the way Peter admired Tony Stark. But Iron Man was totally using this admiration to his advantage. He used Peter's naivety to convince Spider-Man to unmask himself to the world, which caused untold amounts of problems for the hero, not only in that story, but even outside of it. It even sort of indirectly led to the split between Peter and Mary Jane Watson. Now, one of Tony's methods for enforcing the Superhuman Registration Act was deputizing villains to hunt down Captain America's forces as the Thunderbolts. When Spider-Man made his getaway from Iron Man's forces, the Thunderbolts were on him like hotcakes, and if it wasn't for the intervention of the Punisher, Peter could have 100% lost his life, and he almost did. Number 4. Carnage. The red symbiotes always seem to be the worst of the worst, and the one that would be born from Venom himself seems to be the worst of the worst of the worst. When Eddie Brock was briefly detached from the Venom symbiote, he was imprisoned, and his cellmate was none other than Cletus Cassidy, a psychotic serving 11 consecutive life sentences in Rikers Island. Now, when Venom showed up and bust Eddie out of prison, it produced its first offspring as a result of Thanos seeking the Infinity Gems out in space, which is the weirdest reason, but that's what happened. Now, Spider-Man learned the hard way that Carnage was absolutely no joke. The Carnage symbiote was not vulnerable to the same things that Venom was, and his strength and speed were greater than both Spider-Man and Venom. Not to mention, he was absolutely ruthless, even more aggressive than Venom, and with all the lethal of Venom and not a smidge of the Protector. The wall crawler had to call for help to fight Carnage, and from none other than one of his own villains. Number 3. Venom. That villain that he ended up calling in for help against Carnage was none other than Venom himself. Now Venom has had an interesting time in comic books, going from villain to anti-hero, back to villain, and now to just straight up a hero. But when he first showed up, he was absolutely just a villain. Eddie Brock and the symbiote shared a personal vendetta against Spider-Man, and they united in their hate for him, literally bonding over it. Venom posed a huge threat to Spider-Man, becoming a villain that gave Peter a run for his money more than once and in more than one medium. The symbiote's unique ability to bypass Spider-Man's spider sense stripped the hero of his primary defense that has helped him on so many other occasions. And on top of that, Venom was even stronger and more durable than Spider-Man, with sharp pointy teeth and a hell of a lot of extra symbiote abilities that the webhead was just not prepared to deal with. Their initial encounters were intense, with Spider-Man often on the receiving end of brutal beatings. This forced Spider-Man to adapt his fighting style drastically, as the symbiote-covered villain was relentless in his pursuit of the hero's demise. Number 2. Green Goblin. He threw Gwen Stacy off the George Washington Bridge, orchestrated the Clone Saga, and wiped out Ben Reilly right in front of Peter Parker. Norman Osborn is absolutely Spider-Man's #1 adversary, simply for the fact that he has caused Peter more emotional pain than any of his other villains, even Doc Ock. Now obviously everything that I mentioned was Norman, but Harry Osborn was also the Green Goblin, adding physical and emotional turmoil to the whole thing. Now I don't think I need to pick one event in particular, but I would say that Gwen Stacy was the worst of the bunch. Green Goblin proved to Spider-Man that he is not able to save everyone. Even though Peter was so close, he still failed, and when you think about it, Green Goblin made it so that Peter was the one to shoot the web that broke Gwen's back. He may not have known that's how it would go down, but he lucked out with that move, not only terrorizing Peter, but completely psychologically tormenting the poor guy. And finally, in at #1 today, it's The Spot. Jonathan Owen is a villain that only well-versed fans of Spider-Man would recognize, or it used to be that way before Across the Spider-Verse came out. Now as The Spot, Jonathan hasn't always been the most relevant villain of Peter Parker. He often ends up on lists of Spider-Man's worst and unknown villains. I mean, when he first confronted Spider-Man and announced his villain moniker in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man Volume 1, Issue 99 in 1985, the hero hit the ground laughing. Literally, he fell on the ground and was laughing. It was bad. But it made it all the more embarrassing for Spider-Man when the Spot actually defeated him. Spot threw Peter in and out of his dimensions using his hole portals, and he landed more than a few good punches on the hero. The Spot doesn't hit hard, but as he says, even the strongest of trees can be felled by sufficient strokes from even the smallest of hatchets. Yes, he said that. I know it's weird. Eventually, he left Peter discombobulated, with Black Cat having to help him back to his feet. He got his own back eventually, but still, the Spot took him down. Number 10. The Hulk. Now we're starting off this list with a big one. I could have easily chosen all of my spots from when Deadpool killed the Marvel Universe, but while Deadpool has defeated the Hulk and many others, that's not actually canon. But luckily, we do have a canon example of when Deadpool defeated the Hulk. This took place in the 1997 volume of Deadpool in issue #4, when Deadpool needed to challenge the Hulk to get some of his blood in order to counteract the gamma radiation that was affecting Deadpool. The Hulk at this time was making Duck Key his own little paradise, and Deadpool, scared out of his wits, went in this fight just trying to ask for some of the green stuff coursing through the Hulk's veins. Unsurprisingly, the Hulk was not about it. After trying his darndest to get what he wanted, the Hulk was just a bit too much for Wade to handle, so he came up with a cunning plan. As the Hulk jumped up into the air, probably planning to squash Wade when he came back down, Deadpool positioned a broken post on the ground just so perfectly that the Hulk wound up impaling himself right on it when he landed. Now normally this isn't supposed to be possible, and Deadpool makes note of that fact, but apparently the Hulk was a little sick at this point in time, and Wade gets what he wants and gets the heck out of Dodge while he still has the chance. Number 9. Black Panther. So basically what happens here in Black Panther vs. Deadpool #4 is that Mr. Poole heads to Wakanda to steal a bit of vibranium to help heal a mailman. Yes, that is the actual reason. Okay, so Black Panther manages to de-head the merc and then put him back together, restraining him and going through his stuff, particularly his utility belt pouches, in a Wakandan lab. Now, as these two are having a very entertaining back and forth, Deadpool reveals that he has pulled a fast one on T'Challa as he has some C4 in one of those pouches on a timer that is about to go off. Which it does, since there are way too many pouches for T'Challa to find it in time, which is hilarious. Wade actually ends up grabbing a red ceremonial Wakandan necklace and putting it on. Now this was actually a prototype Panther habit. The suit analyzes his DNA, and since Black Panther has everybody's DNA on file, it bestows itself onto Deadpool. It remakes itself on Deadpool, adapting to his usual color scheme and the weapons that he likes to use, christening himself Pantherpool, or Dead Panther. No, Pantherpool. Pantherpool's better. It also pretty much brings him up to par with the true Black Panther, which is proven when the two get into a bit of fisticuffs, until Wade's pocket-sized teleporter activates and he teleports to the Great Mound, aka the Vibranium Mine of Wakanda, which he then accidentally teleports to right outside New Jersey, the whole mountain. Number 8. Wolverine. Deadpool and Wolverine first met in 1994's Wolverine number 88. Now while Wolverine may be stronger, Deadpool's speed, healing factor, his skill in combat, and his absolutely buck-wild behavior has allowed him to get the drop on Wolverine and do a lot of damage many different times. In their first ever encounter, the Merc with a Mouth ambushes Wolverine while he's checking up on Garrison Kane, who's another Weapon X experiment. Now during the ensuing fight, Deadpool earned his reputation as one of Marvel Comics' most brutal mutants by stabbing his two swords into Wolverine's heart and lungs. Now while this typically wouldn't phase the healing mutant, Wolverine had recently lost his healing factor during a bout with Magneto. Now thankfully for Wolverine, his healing factor had begun to slowly return in the days leading up to this fight with Deadpool, allowing him to survive the wounds he'd suffered and win a rematch later on, but he even needed help to do that. It was brutal. Number 7. Daredevil. Now, I wasn't able to find and read the actual comic that this page comes from, but I do know it is in Marvel Now issue number 11, so if you can give me more context to this moment, feel free to do so down in the comments. Essentially, Daredevil had managed to capture Wade and hog-tie him up. As Daredevil is talking with some civilians, Daredevil breaks his own fingers to escape from his confines. He then asks Daredevil where the nearest hospital is. That would be Mount Sinai Medical Center, about 5 blocks away from where they were. Deadpool tells D.D. that he better get a move on, as Deadpool then, out of nowhere, blasts one of the civilians in the leg. Now Daredevil is obviously pretty peed off about this, as Deadpool damaged the civvy's femoral artery, but luckily for Daredevil, Deadpool heard Mount Sinai Medical Center is about 5 blocks away. As Deadpool storms off with Daredevil saying this isn't over, all Deadpool can say back in retort is BRB JK LOL. It's kind of funny. Not gonna lie. Number 6. Ultimate Spider-Man. Ultimate Spider-Man is one of the most beloved Spider-Man runs ever, which made the death of Spider-Man such a hard comic to read. Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, escapes the Triskelon along with Dr. Octopus, Sandman, Kraven the Hunter, Electro, and Vulture, and hides in an apartment building near Central Park. With S.H.I.E.L.D. occupied by an explosion, Osborn tells the 6 sinister villains that it's the perfect time to do God's work and finally take out Spider-Man. Now Otto objects to this plan, but Norman overpowers Otto and deals a fatal blow to him. Learning this, Peter heads to where the battle took place to find Otto's body. He goes off to investigate where Norman was off said to be, but when he leaves, he ends up spotting Captain America standing over a beaten Nick Fury and sees the Punisher aiming a rifle at Cap. That's all part of a separate issue, but he immediately dives towards Cap and pushes him out of the way, taking the bullet on himself. Now while it wasn't fatal, in his weakened state he had a much harder time facing off against Green Goblin and his collected villains. Peter puts up one hell of a heroic fight with the help of Aunt May, the Human Torch, and Mary Jane, taking out pretty much everyone until he faces this super amped up version of Green Goblin. Fighting on his last legs, he's helped out by Mary Jane, who shares one last kiss with Peter before he defeats the Goblin and then suffers his final blow from an explosion. He then passes away in the arms of Mary Jane in a pretty iconic panel, and now I want to cry. So that's great. Number 5. Count Countdown to Infinite Crisis. I think we can all agree that it's incredibly rare to see a mainline superhero taken out of the picture. And if it does happen, it's usually in a huge blaze of glory like Spider-Man up there, or an incredibly tragic moment, or after a long momentous battle with cancer in the case of Marvel's Mar-Vell. So when Ted Kord, Blue Beetle, was erased from existence thanks to a bullet from my barrel at the hands of Maxwell Lord in the Countdown to Infinite Crisis, it was pretty bad. After following Ted the whole book as he struggles for anyone in the Justice League to take him seriously, while he's correctly on the trail of Maxwell Lord and learning of all his misuse of both the Justice League's files, Batman's Brother's Eye satellite, and the OMAX, you'd expect Kord to come out surviving, having a cathartic moment where he finally gets the League's respect or to make a dent in Lord's plans, but instead, he gets snuffed out like a tea light candle that hadn't even begun to make the wax melt. It's abrupt, it's brutal, and it made me legitimately sad to read it. Number 4. House of M. Look, there is getting completely clobbered, losing life or loved ones, going down the path of a tyrant, and turning on one another, and that all happens in House of M. The kicking off point for this story was a defeat all of its own, the heroes being completely helpless as the Scarlet Witch completely rewrote reality. Now while she gave everyone pretty much exactly what they all wanted and made mutants the dominant race on the Earth, she robbed the world of their free will and had them all living a complete lie. And when that lie was uncovered, the Scarlet Witch lost more than she already had. Blaming that loss on her inclusion as a mutant, she spoke the 3 little words of no more mutants, and all at once, the mutant species suffered one of its most devastating defeats. All at once, 986,618 mutants were depowered, leaving some in situations that saw them lose their lives, thanks to the decimation. It was first estimated that 91.4% of the world's mutant population lost their powers overnight, leaving less than 200 mutants in the world. The Xavier Institute's mutant students count went down from 182 to just 27. This left mutants on the brink of complete extinction. Number 3. Hush. Batman has a bit of a habit for being infallible. Or at least I think that's what he likes to tell himself. So, when someone gets the better of him, it hurts. But when that someone is a childhood best friend, I can imagine it hurts quite a bit more. In the 2003 story Batman Hush, Bruce Wayne's childhood friend, Dr. Tommy Elliot, comes back to Gotham, but unbeknownst to Bruce, Tommy has a plan in place. Working with the Riddler and a large array of Batman's rogues gallery, including Killer Croc, Clayface, Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, and even the Joker, Tommy orchestrates a huge plan manipulating events and those closest to Bruce Wayne to leave Batman distracted, outsmarted, paranoid, and ultimately subdued. He uses intimate details of Bruce's life against him in an attempt to take down Batman and have him unmasked at Arkham Asylum, all in some weird attempt for revenge against Bruce's father and a promise made by baby Bruce. Now if it wasn't for the intervention of Jim Gordon and a reformed Two-Face, Batman would have completely lost, being broken down over the course of the story by his old friend. Number 2. Pain of the Gods. If we are talking devastating defeats, a really good place to look would be issues 101 to 106 of JLA from 2004, a storyline titled Pain of the Gods that details each member of the Justice League's biggest failures. It is absolutely depressing, but on the bright side, perfect for this list. It kicks off with Superman, who arrives to save people trapped in a burning building. Now an unnamed hero shows up to lend a hand while Superman saves those inside, and he brings them to safety until an explosion goes off, burning the other superhero to a crisp. The second issue follows Flash as he fails to save 2 younger people from a burning building, finding them when it was too late and the smoke inhalation had got them. He then goes around the city installing fire detectors in every single house, getting mad at a family who didn't find time to go install a new battery. In issue 3, we see John Stewart, Green Lantern, trapped between 2 separate domestics. He rushes to one and prevents it, but when he makes it to the other, it was arguably worse and resulted in a loss of life. The next issue follows Martian Manhunter, but this time it's more of his failings to understand the emotion that we experience as humans and his alienation from that and the pain of losing his entire species. It's really interesting honestly, but moving on to issue 105, this one follows Wonder Woman, and for the Amazon it was an extremely close near-death experience at the hands of a new supervillain that drove her down a path of needing some emotional support. Now each issue ends with the team coming together for each other as a support system, and it's actually really sweet. And it all wraps up in the final issue with a story that was happening alongside everything else I talked about, but I'll leave that for you to read for yourself because it's really cool and I think you'll like it. And finally, in at number 1, it's Nightfall. There are many deranged and off-the-wall villains in Batman's rogues gallery, and while the Dark Knight has suffered losses and defeats at the hands of a few, none of those defeats are as infamous as the one he suffered at the hands of Bane. By issue 11 of the Broken Bat part of the arc, Bane had managed to find out that Bruce Wayne was indeed Batman. Bane surprised Bruce at his home, pumped himself with venom, and laid a brutal beatdown on the Dark Knight in his own home. The fight continued on into the Batcave, and being completely taken by surprise, Batman is on his last legs when the venom-fueled tank of a man lifted Batman over his head and dropped him spine first onto his massive back-breaking knee. This brutal move, captured in one of the most iconic panels ever, put the Batman completely out of commission, requiring him to choose another to fill his role as the protector of Gotham until he could make his final triumphant return.
Number 10. Captain America. Sure, this Captain America wasn't exactly the hero of the story, as we'd later find out the Captain America wasn't really himself, but rather another twisted version that was created by Kobik, fragments of the cosmic cube who fused together to create a sentient being, a little girl. This was due to a misunderstanding where Kobik thought that Captain America would be a better hero if he was basically indoctrinated into Hydra. She hadn't intended necessarily to make him evil, she was just kind of being manipulated by Red Skull, who she actually thought was like a good person, but she was wrong, and she thought Hydra was good. At the same time, Deadpool didn't know any of this and just thought Cap was Cap. He decided to ally himself with Captain America during the events leading up to Secret Empire, but would eventually come to realize that Captain America, aka Hydra Supreme, had really been using and manipulating him. Probably the worst and most humbling of all on our list. This made Deadpool question virtually all of his actions during this period. Not like a punch you in the face humble, but definitely a form of humbling. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, I encourage you, yes you, to click that like button. It really does help us out here at the channel and it feeds the algorithm. Praise be the algorithm. Number 9. Agent Coulson. So he didn't really get beaten by Agent Coulson, but I think considering the fallout of Secret Empire for Deadpool in retrospect, he would have been humbled by, I guess, his actions against Phil Coulson. And sure, Phil Coulson isn't always a hero in the comics. Let's not forget when he ended up being kind of one of the big bads during the 2021 Heroes Reborn event. That was honestly weird for me to read, but mostly I'd say that Phil Coulson tends to be a hero, like in general. And in this case, he really was trying to be a hero. He had intel on Captain America and believed that Stephen had been compromised, and he was right. He was hoping to get this info out so, you know, something could be done before it was too late, but it turned out that Rogers was onto him and sent Deadpool to take out Coulson. While Deadpool was ultimately successful in his mission, it wasn't easy for him to follow this order as he didn't really even know why Captain America needed Phil dead. Later on, he'd learned the truth about Captain America's allegiance when he became Hydra Supreme, and how this Captain America wasn't the same one that we'd always known. This would make Deadpool question everything he'd done during this era, including of course this initial mission for Cap, where it all started, baby. Number 8. Cyclops. Cyclops ended up humbling Deadpool when he refused his offer to become an X-Men member. However, Cyclops would kind of agree to offer Deadpool a place on the team temporarily, but Deadpool would later learn that this was actually only done so that the X-Men could keep an eye on Wade, as basically they didn't trust him. Ouch. After he learned that, after everything he went through to try to help them, he was basically just like, you know what, I don't need you guys. Oh. Poor Wade. So he's left out of the X-Men club. Number 7. Hulk. This one at least isn't too embarrassing for Deadpool, considering he literally wanted to be beaten here. Hulk ended up fighting Deadpool in the 2008 Deadpool series in issue number 38 and 39, and Deadpool actually wanted Hulk to smash him. No, not smash him like that. Although for Deadpool saying this to Hulk, I mean, you maybe never know which version he meant. If he asked you to smash him, you'd be like, wait. Even for Hulk, I feel like I could see the two of them together. Is that weird? I don't know. Deadpool basically wanted to be destroyed, so he told the Hulk that the only way to stop bombs from going off was to beat him up. Deadpool claimed he had a transmitter surgically implanted inside him that would use the electrical current of his body to power itself, sending signals to a new nuke every hour to detonate. Of course, none of this was true. He was just hoping the Hulk would take him out permanently. Unfortunately for Deadpool, despite intentionally losing the fight, his healing factor still went out here.
Number 6. Daredevil again. This time I was able to find and read the actual comic. Yay! Okay, so back in the 1990s, it was quite common for comics to feature iconic duels and let the readers decide the outcomes through a voting system. 1999's Contest of Champions Volume 2 number 4 is a perfect example of this when Daredevil faces off against Deadpool. Deadpool does not fight fair. We know this to be true from the last point, and Daredevil should too. The problem for Daredevil is that he's just too much of a good guy hero. Deadpool takes complete advantage of that fact by throwing a very tiny wrapped up fresh little human off of the roof that the two are fighting on. When Daredevil naturally rushes to save the little one, he goes careening off of the building, catching the wrapped up kid, and he lands in a dumpster. This is when he realizes that the kid was actually not a kid at all, but a doll of Deadpool with a tape recorder of, and I quote, authentic fake baby noisemaker guaranteed to fool superheroes every time, end quote. This is when Deadpool pops up behind Matt Murdock with his fully loaded placed squarely on DD's noggin. Luckily we cut away before Wade finishes the job, but he got him pretty good there. Number 5. Hawkeye. Okay, now to be clear, this isn't actually Hawkeye who Wade is humbling here. This is taking place during the period of time when Norman Osborn is in charge of what he called Hammer, and he has his Dark Avengers. So this is technically Bullseye dressed up as Hawkeye, just so we're clear. Now I've talked about another moment from 2008's Deadpool before, where he and Bullseye fought in a meat factory, and that was also humbling for Hawkeye / Bullseye, but this is on another level. It's also very short and sweet, so that's nice. So in the very next issue, after Bullseye recovers from their last fight in the meat factory, he sets up a trap for Deadpool, who had set up a trap for him. They made a trap for each other. Instead, Deadpool gets very frustrated and just goes out to find Lester on his own. Now driving in a massive truck with huge massive wheels, he passes under a highway bridge where Hawkeye / Bullseye was waiting with a rocket launcher. He fires this at Deadpool, who sees it coming in the rearview mirror, and then he slams on the brakes, drifts the car sideways while rolling down the windows, allowing the rocket to just smoothly fly through the cab of the vehicle and out the opposite window, blowing up in the distance. And all Bullseye / Hawkeye can do is admit how awesome it was. Because it was awesome. It was super cool. Number 4. All of the heroes. Literally all of them. In Marvel's Dark Ages, the awakening of a cosmic war machine known as the Unmaker forced Doctor Strange to create a magically induced electromagnetic pulse that permanently shut down all electronic devices, plunging the world into darkness. Now from the moment the mutant Apocalypse became aware of the Unmaker and the celestial level power the ancient machine possessed, he made it his mission to reawaken it and claim that power for himself. Now knowing that he couldn't accomplish that by himself, Apocalypse kidnapped many of the world's greatest inventors and used the Purple Man's mind control abilities to force them to create a device that would allow him to merge his mind with the Unmakers. Now that is all really hard to follow, and I'm sorry, but when the heroes made their way to Europe, where Apocalypse was doing all of this, they were met by Deadpool, who acted as their guide, bringing them all the way to Apocalypse's setup in Paris. With Purple Man controlling a whole squad of mind-controlled heroes, the good guys were gonna have a hard time fighting them, except out of nowhere, Deadpool just pops a cap in Purple Man's dome, ending Purple Man's control over not just the heroes fighting them, but the ones inside helping Apocalypse with his machine. Now, Deadpool gets scolded by the other heroes, cause apparently Jessica Jones and Luke Cage were gonna knock Purple Man out, but if they had waited any longer, Apocalypse would have been able to complete his plan, so I'd say that Deadpool was right to do what he did. Number 3. Spider-Man. So kicking off right at the beginning of Deadpool Suicide Kings issue number 4, Deadpool is waking up from a characteristically weird dream where he is Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz with Daredevil, Spider-Man, and Punisher as the Cowardly Lion, Scarecrow, and the Tin Man, respectively. That all comes to an end with Tin Man Punisher taking out a little munchkin and Deadpool waking up in the Essex house distraught and met by Daredevil and Spider-Man. Now in the previous issue, Punisher had just blown the head off of Deadpool, so in his re-healing state, Deadpool is still working to get some of his synapses firing, and Spider-Man makes the little joke of, quote, "So what was your excuse before your head exploded? Ha ha ha." Which is kind of funny actually. But then Deadpool says Spidey should be off facing one of his mortal enemies, like the 90-year-old Vulture, or the "hey everyone, I'm really tall, I fight on stilts, Stilt Man," or whatever the hell Gibbon is supposed to be. But then Deadpool goes even more obscure with a reference to the villain Mindworm, who was a big-headed mutant that fed on people's emotions, and then he referenced the kangaroo. Now, of course, Spidey had his own little jabs back, but it kind of feels like when you're the kid getting roasted and you try to come up with anything to try and gain some dignity back and it doesn't work. That's what happened. Number 2, The Punisher. Now, sticking with that same comic, and even actually that same issue, now closer towards the end, Deadpool comes into contact with the Punisher, who, if you remember and were paying attention, it's cool if you weren't, in the previous issue had blown off Wade's head. Now, this was for a crime that Wade did not actually commit, so when they next come to blows inside of a club, Wade is a bit more prepared. Seeing Punisher in a reflection on a mirror, Deadpool is able to give Frank a good old kick in the gut and then send him flying out of one of the club's doors into an alleyway where the fight carries on, and honestly, it's pretty close and a very ruthless fight. Deadpool kind of has the upper hand in his speed, but they both get knocked to the ground. For me, it's the moment where Deadpool is on the ground and he sees Castle as Satan for like a split second. He grabs Punisher by his hair and just slams him face first into the pavement, breaking the guy's nose. In return, Punisher bites off Deadpool's nose, and the whole fight sort of ends in a draw when Punisher finds out Deadpool is innocent and they go off to interrogate some criminals. Now, this is the main humbling moment in my opinion. Frank is interrogating a criminal who is clearly lying, but before Frank can do anything, Deadpool blasts the guy's foot off, and when Frank asks why, Deadpool says, "Because you were going to do it, and this is my book," leaving Frank completely confused as to what's going on. And in at number 1 today, it's Captain America. The villain Dr. Bong was a goofy villain, even during the Golden Age. He has a metal ball where his left hand should be, and he uses it to create concussive blasts by striking the appendage against his bell-shaped head. That's actually what he does. Luckily though, for him, in 2010's Deadpool Volume 2, the villain was reimagined just a smidge more threateningly, having cloned a team of regenerating superheroes and also revealing himself as Deadpool's former therapist. One of these clones was Captain America, so yes, this wasn't the genuine Captain America, but he had the same appearance as the original, and seemingly he had the same abilities as well, and Deadpool sure thought he was the original. The two of these guys fought in a fair bout at first, but Deadpool felt rejected and hurt by Cap in issue number 28. After the fight is interrupted when Deadpool clearly had the upper hand, Dr. Bong demolishes the building they're all in. When everyone comes back to again in the next issue, Deadpool has everyone tied up, including the Captain America clone and the original Captain America. Through some clever interrogation and deductive reasoning about the injuries both of these Caps has sustained, he realizes that one Captain America had healed from his injuries and the other had not, making the first one Cloney McCloneface, and Deadpool blows that face off. It is bad. Coming in at number 10 today is Kraven the Hunter. Kraven the Hunter's comic book tale seemingly came to an end in one of the most shocking Spider-Man stories ever. Kraven's last hunt finally sees the Hunter get the drop on Spider-Man. Sticking Spidey in the neck with a dart and then burying Spider-Man 6 feet under, Kraven actually beat his adversary, which only a handful of villains can actually claim to have accomplished. Thinking Peter Parker is down and out, Kraven weirdly then takes on Spider-Man's costume, or a copy of the black Spider-Man costume, and he hunts down criminals. In an attempt to prove himself that he's better than Spider-Man, he defeated Vermin, a villain that Spider-Man couldn't defeat without help from Captain America. Unfortunately, the whole thing still ends in tragedy for Kraven. Spider-Man digs himself out of the grave and renders Kraven's victory kind of moot, but Kraven also had accomplished his main goal by besting Spider-Man, something that not a lot of people can confidently say, like I said. Convincing himself that he has no reason to live anymore, Kraven chooses to defeat himself permanently. Number 9, Morlun. Coming Home was a Spider-Man story written by J. Michael Straczynski that introduced readers to a fresh new mystical adversary named Morlun. Now, Morlun was an energy vampire who thrived on the life forces of individuals who were powered up by animal totems, and the spider totems, like Spider-Man, were his favorite. In every aspect, Morlun surpassed Spider-Man. He possessed superior strength, speed, and thousands of years of experience. Although Spider-Man managed to emerge victorious in their initial encounter, he couldn't deny the intensity of the battle. So, of course, in their second confrontation, Morlun proved to be absolutely devastating. Morlun dominated Spider-Man, leaving him battered and broken like never before. Morlun even managed to send Spider-Man off with a round-trip ticket to the pits of Tartarus. Now, while Spider-Man's demise was only temporary, his return marked a transformation, turning Spider-Man into basically a monster with newfound abilities that actually allowed him to take the victory. This battle stands out as one of the most crushing defeats Spider-Man has ever endured. Number 8. Juggernaut. Juggernaut is one of the few Marvel heavyweights you just shouldn't cross paths with. Even the heroic heavy hitters know this, but when he rampaged through New York City like an unstoppable force in the Amazing Spider-Man number 229 to 230, Spider-Man had no choice but to intervene. Now, it turns out getting involved was far more than Spider-Man could really handle. Once Juggernaut set himself in motion, nothing could halt him, and Peter learned this the extremely hard way. Over 2 whole comic book issues, Spider-Man exerted all his might against Juggernaut, and it was all futile, as a regular spider trying to stop a train. Spider-Man could do absolutely nothing, and he got completely pummeled. Now, of course, Spider-Man did eventually take the win, but it wasn't anything he physically did that got him the victory. It was actually his brain that stepped in. Juggernaut actually ended up being caught in wet cement, and I gotta be honest, I really don't think that wet cement would actually stop this guy, but they had to get Spider-Man out alive somehow. Number 7. Doc Ock. Dr. Octopus is one of the Spider-Man villains that has a very serious claim at being the primary adversary to Peter Parker. He has consistently given Spider-Man enough grief to cause wrinkles, but then Otto is also one of the few villains to absolutely defeat his hero. When Otto was beginning to lose his life, he managed to find a way to transfer his consciousness into the body of Peter Parker, while transferring Peter's consciousness into his failing body. Peter ended up completely passing away, at least temporarily, inside the body of his adversary, while Otto gained an incredibly powerful body and a new, slightly heroic personality, becoming the superior Spider-Man. But Spider-Ock, or Spock as the fans call him, changes things. He took his genius and experience and applied it, making an awesome new suit, spider bots, and mechanical arms. He also straight up took villains to their graves and even single-handedly defeated the Sinister Six, taking the living brain as a trophy. He completely dumps MJ, but starts a relationship with Anna Maria Marconi, who became a popular addition to the Spider-Man canon. He purged Carly Cooper of the Goblin Serum, helped Aunt May walk again, got Peter his PhD, mainly for clout, and built a scientific empire that would make him a multi-billionaire. He made himself a much more efficient hero than Spider-Man ever could be. Or was.
Number 6. Spider-Man. Not only has Moon Knight very physically humbled Spider-Man from the Ultimate Universe, or rather I guess I should say the old Ultimate Universe anyway, but he's also humbled the Spider-Man of Earth 616 in a very personal way. At one point, Mark Spector adopted certain personas which acted as additional split personalities as part of his dissociative identity disorder. You might be familiar with Stephen Grant, Jake Lockley, and Mr. Knight, but these personas were unlike any of those that Moon Knight sometimes adopts and uses. But these personas that I'm talking about here were unlike any of those others that Moon Knight sometimes adopts and uses that you probably are familiar with. These were people that existed separate from Mark, who he was basically impersonating, other heroes, one of them being Spider-Man. He donned Spider-Man's costume, literally impersonating him as he fought against the criminal underground of LA. At one point, this prompts Spider-Man, who was wrongfully, of course, getting critiqued for some of what Mark was up to ask Mark if he indeed dressed up as him and attacked an adult nightclub, to which Mark confirms, yes, he did. A little. Number 5. Captain Marvel. This one was particularly brutal, especially for me as a Carol fan. Another hero who was targeted during the Age of Khonshu story in the 2018 run of the Avengers was none other than Captain Marvel herself, Carol Danvers. Carol and Tony, aka Iron Man, were the last line of defense when it came to protecting the power of the Star Brand, which Khonshu wanted most of all. And when Moon Knight came to collect, he made surprisingly easy work of Carol here. He used the powers of Ghost Rider to basically incapacitate her, seemingly trapping her in the trunk of Robbie Reyes' Ghost Rider car. But as embarrassing as that predicament was for Captain Marvel, at least it was only very temporary. She quickly recovered, escaping from the trunk and flying in to save Starbrand and Iron Man, who according to Moon Knight looked like he was ready to consider handing over the young Starbrand host to Moon Knight and Khonshu due to the threat of Mephisto. In fact, even later, Iron Man's like, whatever you do, like, just you keep Starbrand. I probably shouldn't hold on to her. Number 4, Khonshu. I don't know if we exactly consider Khonshu to be a hero per se. He's kind of more neutral. He's done some good and often acts from a place of, believing, I would say, he's doing what is right, but he's not always correct about that. And sometimes even his best of intentions lead him to doing morally questionable things, let's say. Like in Age of Khonshu, when he struck out against the Avengers. He did this because he believed it needed to be done to defeat Mephisto, believing he needed to conquer Earth to, in essence, protect it from the Mephisto army that threatened to take control. So he was doing all this to, protect Earth. However, he was kind of wrong in that, because also conquering people, is that protecting them? Not really. And in the end, this prompted even his own avatar, Mark Spector, Moon Knight, to turn on him, with Moon Knight winning over the power of the Phoenix Force and using his own 2 fists of Khonshu to help defeat the Moon God. Or rather, his fists of Phoenix, really, at that time, I should say. Number 3, Daredevil. These two have a brief fight in the 1980 series of Moon Knight in issue number 13. Here, Daredevil is hot on the trail of a villain known as the Jester. Unfortunately, Moon Knight decides to interfere as he cannot allow DD to apprehend this criminal yet. He cuts the zip line that Daredevil is using to cut across part of the city, and Daredevil stumbles, or rather falls, sort of tumbles into an arcade, which discombobulates his radar sense, because as we know with Daredevil, he really needs his hearing to actually be able to see, making it pretty much impossible for him to see, or it's pretty wonky in that arcade due to all the arcade noise. The two get in a scuffle, and while DD doesn't do a terrible job, I would say, of fighting against Moon Knight, considering at this moment he truly is really blind as a bat since his radar sense is affected, in the end he's defeated by Moon Knight, who throws his own billy club back at DD. Fortunately, right afterwards, the two heroes talk and end up deciding to team up, as is usually the way of these things. But still, I mean, it's a Moon Knight comic, so what do we expect when Moon Knight and Daredevil fight? In a Moon Knight comic, I'm gonna expect Moon Knight to win, and he does. Number 2, Thor. Thor and Moon Knight had a very brief fight at the beginning of the Age of Khonshu event, where Thor was quickly put in his place. He does get revenge later on though, but that's a point for another list. The fight didn't last long, mainly because Moon Knight was actually able to wield Mjolnir. But not only that, not really so much wield, he was able to control the hammer. He was able to easily take it for himself. Thor, in fact, is one of the first heroes Moon Knight faces off with during this story, which is made all the more impressive when you consider that perhaps, apart from Hulk, Thor is often considered to be one of, if not the strongest Avenger that we have. Moon Knight simply lets Thor know that the metal his hammer is made of, Uru, believed to be one of the oldest metals in the universe, actually comes from an orb of night. That is, a moon. It's moon metal, guys. It's moon rock. And because it is in essence made of that powerful moon rock, it's within Moon Knight's control to manipulate said weapon, since he's an avatar of the god of the moon. Number 1, Moon Knight. Yep. At one point, Moon Knight defeated himself. He actually also faced himself in the very important Moon Knight story told throughout the Avengers, Age of Khonshu. Here, Moon Knight in the end realizes that he kind of might be the problem here and decides that, he's done working for Khonshu. He's kind of done with gods, preferring to pray only to himself. In his final fight in the story against Black Panther, he ends up on the losing side of this fight and begs for Black Panther to finish it. To be clear, this is another fight that happens with Black Panther later on, not the first one that I talked about earlier on. However, Black Panther refuses to take Mark's life, permanently defeating Mark here. Instead, Mark decides to just finish it himself because he has to finish that prayer. So he punches himself so hard that he's basically reborn as the Phoenix. Number 10, Bishop. When Bishop shows up on the scene, he is quick to single out Gambit, who he believes to be the man he knows as the Witness in his future. He believes this is why the Witness will not speak or show anything regarding the mutant Gambit, because he is the mutant Gambit, and Bishop thinks he is the one who betrays the X-Men in the future. However, everyone else in the X-Men is very offended by this implication, and Jean wonders if, despite all the drama, they can just still go on their planned picnic. In gloriously 90s fashion, despite Bishop's appearance, they actually do go on a picnic. It is here that Bishop confronts Gambit while he is on a picnic with Rogue specifically. Although Gambit is not down for the count, Bishop does slug him so hard that he goes flying into Rogue. The whole interaction is honestly like comedy gold. It is peak 90s, but one does feel pretty bad for Gambit in all of this. I mean, I always feel bad for Gambit. People always always coming in being like, Gambit, you're trash, you're terrible. And I'm like, you don't even know. Like, just give him a second, let him breathe. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you love it when we talk mutants, I know I love it, be sure to check out our X-Men playlist for even more mutant content. Number 9, himself. Gambit actually humbled himself intentionally in the comics. If you've ever seen Gambit doing his thing and thought he has the potential to be even more powerful, you would actually be right. Gambit in fact has the potential to be a dangerous level of powerful with his abilities, which is why he actually asked Mr. Sinister to literally nerf him by messing with his brain. Gambit had Mr. Sinister intentionally dampen his powers so that he wouldn't hurt anyone, and in return, for a while, Gambit was indebted to Mr. Sinister and therefore forced to do his dirty work. Number 8. Iceman. It's blue versus gold in this issue, and as a result, Gambit ends up face to face with Bobby Drake's Iceman. While he may have been able to dodge every shot Forge could target him with, and even parry some of those shots back at Forge, when it comes to Iceman, Gambit is quickly and handily defeated as he is knocked out with a solid block of ice. He did not see that one coming, which hits him square on the jaw. Number 7. Black Panther. What a terrible time for Gambit's powers to go on the fritz, oh boy. Right when he's in the middle of a fight with Black Panther. Yet, that's just what happened in Gambit and Rogue's most recent team-up series, Rogue and Gambit Volume 2 from 2023. Here, Gambit and Rogue are accused of kidnapping fellow mutant and friend to T'Challa, Manifold, at the behest of Destiny, who had a vision about how Manifold could basically be the key to saving all of mutant kind. Black Panther doesn't really blame Rogue though here, he actually blames Gambit for corrupting his wife, seeing him as no more than a common low-level thief. See what I'm saying? Gambit just can't catch a break, man. Black Panther pounces at Gambit, and while Gambit manages to get in at least a single hit, his powers then decide to just stop working, which is something Rogue and Gambit have both been dealing with in the desert, power loss, in that series. And so Rogue steps in to save the day while Gambit creates a distraction so they can just simply escape T'Challa instead of fight him, because they know if they fought him, probably not gonna win, especially if they don't have powers. Number 6. Squirrel Girl. I mean, it was only a matter of time, right? They don't call Doreen Green unbeatable for nothing. This fight went down mainly as the result of a miscommunication between the two. Deadpool thought that Squirrel Girl wasn't registered under the Superhuman Registration Act. However, before they could have a discussion and clear things up between them, first, they, of course, had to fight. Normally, Deadpool is a lot better at fighting than he was here, but as he sometimes does, and as many of us do, he got distracted. He became obsessed with Squirrel Girl's appearance and became fixated on guessing her superhero name and the reason why she appeared to be a woman-squirrel hybrid. His distracted state gave Doreen the advantage she needed to beat him. And then afterwards, they of course were able to talk it out and resolve the miscommunication. Sometimes you gotta swing a few punches first and then sit down and have a little chat. Number 5. Daredevil. Daredevil is not a hero I personally would want to go up against, especially if I was Wade at this time and I was like basically a shapeshifter who looks super questionable. Deadpool underestimated Daredevil and was quickly put in his place. Despite attempting to explain himself, Daredevil still decided to restrain Deadpool, leaving him defeated and bound in the middle of the street at the end of their fight. Number 4. Thor. Deadpool used to love dressing up as Thor, but while people say imitation is the best form of flattery, let's keep in mind that this is a Midgardian saying and not an Asgardian one. I don't even know what the sayings or idioms of Asgard are. Eternal life is like an apple? Is that one of them? It would make sense. So of course, when Thor came across Deadpool impersonating him, he was not too pleased. And look, Deadpool is a pretty gifted fighter and also has that healing factor on lock, but he's not nearly, not even close to as powerful as Thor is. Not by a long shot. So of course, no one was surprised when Thor made pretty quick work of Deadpool with his hammer Mjolnir. Number 3. Spider-Man. Spider-Man even beat Deadpool at his own games. Deadpool sometimes operates on a different level than most other superheroes, or rather anti-heroes in the Marvel Universe. There have been times when he fights simply with the power of his mind, and I don't mean that he's telekinetic or is a psionic powerhouse or anything like that. I mean with his ability to break the fourth wall and escape into a fantasy land, which often manifests somehow in reality. I don't know how that works, but it's a thing. This is what happened when Deadpool fought Spider-Man in the Ultimate Spider-Man animated series. Here, Deadpool was attempting to get a list from Spider-Man that would be extremely valuable if put in the wrong hands, making Deadpool a bunch of money. And as a mercenary, we all know Deadpool does love his money. The two fought, and Deadpool ended up using the power of his imagination to try and defeat Spider-Man. But fortunately, Spider-Man, master of quips and puns that he is, was able to turn the tables on Deadpool, hitting him with a book of morals, literally, that made Deadpool reflect on his origins and feel real feelings, which ultimately cost him the fight. Although he refused to be taken into fury by Spider-Man, Deadpool did admit that their fight was going to make him go home and cry himself to sleep. So there is that. Number 2. Wolverine and Sabretooth. Okay, so Sabretooth isn't really a superhero, but sometimes in the comics he has actually been good. Did you know that? Like during Axis, when many heroes and villains had their alignments reversed. Sabretooth was one of the characters whose alignment stayed permanently reversed after the events of Axis. It wouldn't be till later, after he had sacrificed himself in order to save his son, that he would get turned back to his original alignment and become evil again. In the version of the story I'm talking about though, Sabretooth was not really a good guy. Because yeah, we're talking about X-Men Origins Wolverine, the film. Yeah, that film. But I still wanted to include Sabretooth in this point because, as I said, he isn't always so bad, and in this fight he and Wolverine are actually forced to team up to take down Wade Wilson, who becomes the strangest version of Deadpool we've ever seen on screen as Weapon 11. As Weapon 11, Wade had no mouth to make quips with, and instead of having his two katanas, he had two swords just in his arms. He made for a very weird opponent who also was super hard to defeat, surprisingly, but with Wolverine and Sabretooth both coming out against him, Logan was able to find a window to take him down. Number 1. Cable. Well, these two have had a ton of goofy fights too, and also have had a ton of honestly sweet moments in the comics. This was actually a pretty serious fight that happened between them. It went down during Civil War I. This all happened as a result of Deadpool and Cable being on different sides of this first Civil War. Deadpool ended up on the side of pro-registration and went around trying to round up heroes who refused to register. However, then he came across Cable, who attempted to try and talk Wade out of making this mistake. Deadpool, however, of course, would not listen to reason, and the two were forced to fight one another. Deadpool fired darts at Cable, but Cable's shield caused them to rebound back, making them hit Deadpool, so yeah, Deadpool ended up losing this one. And also, he was kinda on the losing side of that Civil War, to be honest with you. Deadpool is bad luck when it comes to like, which side are you gonna choose? Number 10. Moon Knight. This one was insane when it happened during the Age of Khonshu's story. My mind was blown. Your mind was likely blown, and probably everyone's minds were blown. Everyone who read this, that is. And if you didn't, well, prepare to have your mind blown as I get you up to speed. During Age of Khonshu, Moon Knight turned on pretty much all of the Avengers. Did this make him a villain? Not really. He actually thought he was doing the right thing as he tried to help Khonshu prepare to take down Mephisto, who is, you know, a pretty big bad. However, he was later made aware of the fact that Khonshu wanted to defeat Mephisto so that he, instead, could kinda rule the world and shape it in his own image, turning it into a sort of Egyptian afterlife. So in the end, Khonshu had to be defeated and imprisoned, and Moon Knight instead turned on his own god, working to help the Avengers fight back against him. But before that, Moon Knight was on a mission to collect powerful, heroic artifacts and powers to help him in his quest to aid Khonshu. One such magical and heroic artifact that he needed was Thor's hammer, and he was able to get it as it was revealed that Moon Knight could actually control the hammer, not necessarily because he was worthy, but because of its metallic makeup, being made of Uru, which means it's essentially made of moon rock. Yeah, that's what Uru is. Really old moon rock from the first moon. And the moon is kind of Moon Knight's thing, which meant he didn't need to be worthy to wield Mjolnir. And friends, before I move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd and you love it when we talk about heroes that are getting humbled by other heroes, be sure to let us know by clicking that like button. It does feed the algorithm gods. Number 9. Zeus. Love and Thunder might not have been the movie we were all hoping for, but it did have some pretty hilarious moments, and some tragically embarrassing ones for Thor as well. One such moment, which was both, happened when Thor finally met his hero, the god Zeus. However, as the saying goes, never meet your heroes. Zeus decided to remove Thor's disguise and ends up completely removing Thor's clothes as a result. Pretty embarrassing. This leaves Thor completely uncovered in front of Zeus, while everyone around Thor laughs, because he's not just in front of Zeus, he's in front of a whole bunch of other gods. Oh boy. And Valkyrie. And Jane. Zeus isn't exactly a hero in this story, but he also isn't exactly a villain, I would say, either. He's more just like kind of a self-absorbed and stubborn god, which is what ultimately leads him into a conflict with our heroes in the story when he refuses to listen to them. And I'm sure if, we do actually get more Hercules stuff, we're gonna see that it's complicated. The Greek pantheon is just a different pantheon, so. Number 8. Black Bolt. Black Bolt ends up facing off against a venom-possessed Thor in the What If comic What If the Alien Costume Had Possessed Spider-Man. In this story, the Fantastic Four failed to remove the suit from Peter, as it's too late for them to do so, with the symbiote and Spider-Man being fully bonded. This leads to Peter being drained of all life energy and rapidly aging before the suit jumps to a new host. It possesses Hulk, and when Thor arrives on the scene, decides to instead attempt to bond with Thor. While Thor fights against the alien costume, Black Bolt appears and uses his powerful voice to blast away the Venom symbiote, defeating it and saving Thor from its influence, through of course, defeating him. Number 7. Hercules. As was implied at the end of Love and Thunder, Zeus is not the only god that Thor faces off against. It seems that the after credits were actually setting up a future fight between the Norse hero god and the Greek one Hercules, son of Zeus. And in the comics, this has actually happened before. Hercules has indeed beaten Thor in the past. While Thor would typically be more powerful than Hercules, I'd surmise just based on what I've read of both of these characters, there was a time when Thor's power levels had been somewhat reduced by Odin, and he challenged Hercules to a fight. And it was during this fight that Hercules actually managed to come out on top instead, so Hercules won that one. Number 6. Joelle. Is Joelle really a superhero? Well, she's a superpowered person, and while she is also a thief, I don't think her motives are necessarily bad here at all, so I'm gonna count her, okay? I just like Joelle. She's fun, she's quippy, she's sassy. I like her. And she isn't focused on hurting anyone, really. Actually, Joelle actively shows that she wants to make sure that no one else gets hurt because of her, which seems pretty heroic. Joelle was the woman that Remy met up with in his own series, Gambit, volume number 5, out of 2012. Throughout the series, Joelle is constantly putting him in his place. While she claims that she needs his help to get a cure for her daughter, what she really wants is something that will end her life. Her power is eternal, and she no longer wants to continue on after suffering too much loss. Personally, I love how much she schools and teases Gambit throughout the series, and I am really sad that she was such a short-lived character, because she was pretty cool. Number 5. Wolverine. We're talking about The Lost Trail, and at least there is cover art for this podcast though, so we can show that. That's one image we have. The Lost Trail is a follow-up story to the previous Wolverine podcast, The Long Night. While in Long Night, Wolverine is mainly a mysterious figure for much of the story, who was a suspect in some trouble that happened up in Alaska. In Lost Trail, he is very much one of the main characters as he ventures down to Louisiana and the Bayou to find his missing past love, Maureen, while also helping a teenage kid, Marcus Baptiste, look for his ma, who, along with their mutant-based community, also went mysteriously missing. During his time in Louisiana, he runs into his former colleague Gambit, and also at one point is forced to fight Gambit. Gambit at the time was being brainwashed by Mastermind, FYI. Wolverine successfully schools him, breaking his bow staff and knocking him out with, a single punch. Poor Gambit, everyone is always breaking his bow staff. That just happens a lot. He must have an endless supply of bow staffs. Number 4. Rogue. During the Rogue and Gambit miniseries, Rogue humbles Gambit in a different sort of way. In regards to his smooching abilities, Rogue, hitting him where it hurts. Rogue really knows how to take Gambit down a notch. I think this went down in their team-up miniseries, Rogue and Gambit. Not the most recent one, the one that happened before that, because there's been a couple of those. Gambit confronts Rogue about hearing that she had kissed Deadpool, sharing that news spreads fast among the X-Men gossip grapevine. Rogue attests that she personally knows that, as she has received many concerning calls regarding Remy's behavior over the years. She then goes on to suggest that Deadpool, due to his lack of face, may actually even be a better kisser, because he tries harder than Remy does, implying that Remy skates by on good looks as opposed to skill in the romance department. Boom. Boom. Mic drop. Number 3, Emma Frost. Emma Frost definitely put Gambit in his place when he and Rogue were having some romance issues. Gambit and Rogue had been depowered together, but when their powers returned, they kinda struggled to return to a life of, well, pure celibacy. They reached out to Emma Frost for help, who consulted with them and attempted to find a safe space where they could come together telepathically, so not physically in the real world, but kind of physically in their minds. Through her therapy, they were able to be in the same space and touch without danger, except for the fact that their own fears around intimacy and the status of their relationship actually did keep them apart, acting like blocks in their mind. Initially, Rogue almost killed Gambit in the telepathic state, and another time he imagined Rogue as one of his students who was actively attempting to pursue him. This prompted Remy to freak out, and Emma slapped him back to reality. When Rogue picked up on Gambit's feelings, she called him out on his baggage, with him retorting that if he was with his student Fox, who was really Mystique in disguise unbeknownst to them both, to make it a little less creepy, but still it's pretty creepy, he wouldn't have to deal with telepathic therapy. So there, Rogue, putting the blame back on her. And after Rogue, of course, stormed off, Emma was there to call out Gambit for making this way worse with his response to Rogue's comment. Emma truly seemed frustrated with both of them, to be honest, although perhaps more so with Gambit. And I mean, Gambit was the one that she slapped in that issue, so. Number 2, Captain America. To be honest, Gambit actually gave Cap a pretty good run for his money here, but it sadly was not good enough. In Avengers vs. X-Men issue number 2, we're starting off with a fight between the X-Men's Gambit and the Avengers' Captain America, Steve Rogers. Why are these two fighting? Well, because of a larger issue at hand. Avengers vs. X-Men was really all about a conflict surrounding the Phoenix Force. Basically, the Avengers felt like the Phoenix Force was unsafe and should be fought and like destroyed, whereas the X-Men were more open to the idea of using the Force, as they thought it would actually help in bringing back the mutant species that had been drastically reduced in number following the events of M-Day. First, it seems as though Gambit has the upper hand in this fight, with him even going so far as to charge Cap's armor and blow it up, thinking that'll end the fight, but Captain America is apparently tougher than Gambit estimated. He not only survives the explosion, but manages to then knock Gambit out with one punch. Another fight where Gambit's bow staff is tragically destroyed. Rest in peace, Gambit's bow staff. Always destroyed. Number 1, Gambit. I know what you're thinking. Am I putting Gambit on this list twice? Well, sort of. Gambit literally humbled himself in the one case, but in this case, Gambit humbled not necessarily himself as Gambit, but New Sun, who is an alternate version of Gambit entirely. This version of Gambit never had the inhibiting surgery performed on him, and so he was powerful enough to essentially destroy worlds. His powers had grown to the point that he didn't even need to see an object to charge it with energy. New Sun was powerful enough to take on other superpowered beings like the Phoenix and beat them. In fact, New Sun had not only destroyed the Phoenix, but as I said, destroyed his own entire world that he came from. Gambit, because of this, was forced to unlock the full potential of his power once more to take on New Sun. And guess what? It worked! His sense of creativity was actually more attuned and heightened than New Sun's was, and he was able as such to defeat his alternate self. However, in the process, he essentially burned out his powers, overcharging himself. So that's why instead of being Omega level today, he's still considered to be, well, just Alpha, once more nerfing himself. Although this time, not necessarily intentionally, but just doing so in order to save the day. And also, who knows, he might become Omega again one day.
Number 10, Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom and Spider-Man do not fight in the same weight class at all. However, in their first ever encounter, Spider-Man did manage to get the better of Doom, and that may have stung. So, in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, number 349 and 350, it did not go well for the wall crawler at all. This time, Spidey was tracking an elderly jewel thief named the Black Fox, who had stolen the priceless Trask Diamond. Black Fox had also happened to barter one of Victor Von Doom's family heirlooms, an emerald passed down to him by his late mother. Once Doom became aware of this transgression, he flew to New York and caught up with the Black Fox at the same time Spider-Man did. When Spidey intervened on the Black Fox's behalf, Dr. Doom did not hold back. Doom nonchalantly thrashed the hell out of the web-slinger, leaving him with his costume in tatters and desperately scrambling away for his life. While he convinced Doom to allow him time to retrieve his old family heirloom, Peter's severe beating had left him concussed, so much so that he even hallucinated Uncle Ben. The beating he took taught Spidey an important lesson about recognizing his own limits. Number 9, Kingpin. Now, I'll admit, we at Top 10 Nerd, like a lot of comic book nerds, love to talk about the time that Peter Parker nearly ended Wilson Fisk's life, beating the heck out of him in prison in front of all of his goons. He embarrassed the heck out of Fisk that day, but that was all to prove that he can, because there have been numerous times where the Kingpin has shown Spider-Man the error of his ways. Take the very first meeting, for example. In The Amazing Spider-Man number 50 and 52, this is the famous arc where Spider-Man gives up being a superhero, and in his absence, the Kingpin jumps at the opportunity. The comic makes it pretty clear that Spider-Man assumes that Kingpin is just some big squishy overweight man. This proves to be a pretty rough mistake. Kingpin is much faster and much stronger than Spider-Man initially realizes, being actually composed of almost entirely muscle. He gets Peter with a good grab and slam, and then out of left field he uses a gas to knock out the Spider by the end of issue number 51. Now issue number 52 sees Kingpin's goons putting Spider-Man and J. Jonah Jameson in an extremely supervillainy chamber, locking them up and slowly filling it with water. Sure, Spider-Man does escape, but even the final fight against Kingpin sees the villain get a bunch of good hits and even escape. Number 8. Mephisto. One More Day is infamous among Spider-Man fans, and understandably so. The story completely retconned Spider-Man's marriage to Mary Jane Watson out of continuity, and it was all thanks to Mephisto. And poor choices by Marvel, but whatever. This was a relationship that had been built up over literal decades, that had been carried over into the movies, the newspaper strip, every other version of Spider-Man. It was arguably Marvel's best romance, and Mephisto took it all away in exchange for saving Aunt May's life. The storyline takes place after Marvel's Civil War crossover, where Spider-Man revealed his secret identity to the world. In the fallout after Civil War, dozens of villains targeted Peter Parker and his loved ones, including Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, and Peter's Aunt May was caught in the crossfire. Desperate to save May Parker's life, Spider-Man went to anyone and everyone to find some way to avert disaster. When no one else came through though, the devil himself, Mephisto, offered Peter a treacherous trade. May's life in exchange for Peter and MJ's marriage. Now, love it or hate it, it happened, and it made Spider-Man give up his greatest love ever. Number 7. Black Tarantula. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't know much about Black Tarantula before this day, but now that I do, I actually really like him. He's super cool. So, showing up in The Amazing Spider-Man 432, Black Tarantula seemingly attacks our spider hero out of nowhere, chucking half a chimney at him as his first move. Now, while Spider-Man tries to figure out who the heck this guy is and why he is after Spider-Man in the first place, he is dodging out of the way of optic blasts, massive punches, and even his webs do nothing as Tarantula just rips through them like tissue paper. Spider-Man even has a whole flashback about how Mary Jane wanted him to quit being Spider-Man during this fight, which was interrupted as Black Tarantula smashes through the wall that Spider-Man was standing on. Spider-Man ends up floating down to an alleyway, and while he gets maybe 2 or 3 punches on Tarantula, when the villain gets his hand on Spider-Man's ankle, it's all over. He slams Peter between the alleyway walls and down onto the pavement. He then literally rips off Peter's mask, revealing his bruised face, before telling him that he is sparing him so he can find Norman Osborn's missing child, but when he's done that, Spider-Man needs to leave New York. He then walks off, leaving Peter in the fetal position, counting his injuries and thanking his stars that he's still alive.
Number 6. She-Hulk. She-Hulk doesn't need to fight Thor to humble him. She just has to look at him the right way and call him out on his feelings. These two were an item for a while in the previous Avengers run in the comics. Their relationship came about from their bonding on the Avengers team together, and likely due to them both being super fun-loving characters who also honestly both love a good fist fight. They are both powerful characters who aren't afraid of having fun, and Thor of course was not intimidated by Jen's strength as She-Hulk, but instead admired her for it. Of course, that isn't to say the couple didn't have their challenges. At one point they almost broke up because Jen wasn't sure if Thor loved her solely for her She-Hulk persona and appearance. Thor was actually humbled by Jen, who actually called him out on this, but she was then reassured that he loved her for who she was entirely, both as Jennifer Walters and as She-Hulk, which he admitted he saw as basically one and the same. super cute. While I was never a big fan of this relationship when it was happening, I have to admit that every time I return to it in the comics when I'm talking about it here on Top 10 Nerd, I gotta say, it makes me more and more a fan of it, and I get it more and more every time I return to it. I just think maybe these two could be shipped together, maybe it would really work. And now I'm like, man, now that relationship's gone. I love how when there's ships that I come around to after the ship has already happened. That ship has sailed. Number 5, Sentry. This one didn't happen in the main continuity, but as is implied in this what if the conditions were right in the main continuity, it could have very well gone down like this. Sentry is often thought of as the Superman of the Marvel Universe, or one of them anyways, so it would make sense that he'd stand a chance against Thor, as Superman in the comics is basically a godlike figure. However, when these two faced off during Dark Reign's Siege story, it was Thor who came out on top. Now, in the What If comic centered around Siege, Sentry instead kills Ares earlier on, which means that when Thor comes to face him, he actually isn't as exhausted from that immediate fight, which is what happens in the main continuity. This means he has enough stamina to not only defeat Thor, but also to destroy, get this, all of the Avengers besides. Yeah, Sentry is super powerful, and I do believe he could take Thor in a fight. Number 4, Scarlet Witch. I'm not surprised that Wanda could take Thor myself. Scarlet Witch is one of the most powerful heroes in, I would say, the entire Marvel multiverse after all. However, some might be surprised by this, especially when you consider that Thor is also partly connected to the realm of magic, and especially if you consider that, you know, Wanda is a magic user, so she's kinda squishy. Of course, Thor doesn't typically tend to use magic to fight, and Wanda being squishy, I mean, you gotta get to her first. Now, Thor does have something magical that he could use here, and that would be his hammer Mjolnir, but that was not enough to save him from Wanda's spells when she was forced to turn on her friend and fellow Avenger after he'd been mind controlled by Red Skull, who was using Professor X's brain at the time. Yep, that's what happened, that was the whole thing. Scarlet Witch managed to use her powers to hold Thor back, preventing him from hurting her or any other heroes or villains. And I would say she did so pretty successfully. Personally, I would say Wanda could beat Thor if she wanted to. Just normally they don't have to fight because they're friends. Number 3, Phoenix. The Phoenix is one of the few heroes who succeeded in destroying Thor. I mean, it's hard to compete with the sheer impossible force of the Phoenix. This time around, it wasn't just one person who took down Thor as the Phoenix instead. It was Thor against 5 individuals with the power of the Phoenix Force, which was split between them, who each honestly handily defeated him. The group of Phoenix-empowered heroes who he went up against included Cyclops, Emma Frost, Namor, Magik, and Colossus. In fact, at one point Colossus was even seemingly able to separate Thor from Mjolnir, not an easy feat. Also, if Thor faces off against the Phoenix, who's kind of like his mom as well, does that mean that he got schooled by his own mom? Is that what that means? Gotta ask. Number 2, Hulk. Hulk and Thor are 2 of the greatest rivals in the comics. Now sure, they're both heroes, and sure, they're both friends, but that doesn't mean that they have not gotten into a fight or 2, or several, or, well, a bunch. Sometimes these fights can even get pretty serious, sometimes they just are carried out to settle once and for all which one of them is the strongest Avenger. So, who really is the strongest Avenger? Well, while many of the fights that I've read show Thor coming out on top, there have been a few times when Hulk has proven that he really is the strongest there is, even against a cosmic god who wields a magic hammer. In fact, Mjolnir tends to be one of the greatest challenges that Hulk often faces in his fights against Thor. But in one fight featured in the Hulk Let the Battle Begin story, Hulk finds a way around this by simply not trying to move the hammer itself, but instead Thor's own arm that's holding the hammer. In this way, Hulk is able to basically make Thor hit himself with his own hammer, knocking himself out. Pretty good go around. Pretty smart, Hulk. Number 1, Beta Ray Bill. Beta Ray Bill humbled Thor in his very first fight against him. The two faced off when Beta Ray Bill mistook Thor for an enemy, threatening his people, survivors from his homeworld who were basically searching for a new home. The two fought and Bill won, initially even claiming Mjolnir for himself as spoils from their fight. Of course that would all be corrected, and then they'd become friends, but hey, Beta Ray, he got it.